So the truth about DEI is that it's failing. It's not working as intended. DEI, diversity, equity and inclusion, it's not really working too well for the companies from a profit perspective, and it's not working for many employees because many employees feel like they're being overlooked by these policies, that it's replacing competency in meritocracy-based hierarchies, you're giving people favorable treatment based on how supposedly they're oppressed by other people. So it's failing. There is a massive pushback against it in tech, in finance, across corporate America. DEI is not meritocracy, it's discriminating in some cases against all men, against white people, against Asians. And there's a good case here where Microsoft is actually firing the DEI contacts that they have, right? So we've got this article here. It says Microsoft is firing the DEI team and is ditching the woke policy. So that's a very interesting thing to be focused on, because typically these big companies are super aggressive in pushing DEI, but now all of a sudden they want to push back on it themselves, right? It says Microsoft has reportedly laid off a team dedicated to this diversity agenda, and after pouring millions of dollars. So these companies have so much money to waste. They're not going to spend that money giving you higher salary or bigger bonuses based on your performance. They're going to come up with these radical left-wing ideologies and say, oh, we're going to take millions of dollars, pour it into that, and then they decided to ditch it the moment employees started complaining about it, and the moment that you realize that you're prioritizing diversity over profitability or productivity of an employee is not going to work out too well. Then it mentions here a decision was made that this is a further sign that companies are pulling back on the diversity initiatives. See, these were put in place after the George Floyd and BLM protests, right? Now, what a lot of people don't want to accept because it's such a sensitive topic is the George Floyd situation and DEI that was aggressively pushed after it was pushed. Firstly, the George Floyd situation was leveraged by the media to secure the black vote for the Democrats. Now, of course, we don't agree with police brutality or any type of race kind of discrimination and things like that. But it's very clear at this point, DEI was brought up very briefly around after the George Floyd incident, and it kind of disappeared after a few years. BLM appeared when it comes to the election year, and then it dissipates after a few years. The same thing with the whole George Floyd focus. Like, this was deliberately engineered in 2020 to secure the election for sleepy Joe Biden. And then it kind of disappeared, and it's very easy. This was a key case of manipulation. So we've got many other cases of stuff like this, right? I've noticed that this was a temporary thing around the election time, as I mentioned. It was not really based on helping people of color. And I've seen many cases in real life circumstances where they would remove straight men, straight white men, Asian men, and because we were not the chosen demographic, you'd see people from the rainbow community, women, other ethnic minorities that would be given favorable treatment on the basis of DEI. And it was kind of a clear pattern when you looked at who they were firing and who they were keeping at some of these companies. So there's another few key points here. It says last year, Google and Meta reduced the scope of their DEI programs and cut staff as part of restructuring and layoffs. On Tuesday, the tractor giant John Deere announced that they will remove some of these DEI policies. The farm chain retailer Tractor Supply also did this. So you got tech companies, Google and Meta, farm companies. Companies can't simply focus on DEI for the sake of it. There are many other companies like Zoom that have also looked at cutting back on DEI because Zoom, Snap, Tesla, DoorDash, Lyft, Home Depot, for Wayfair have also downsized their DEI agendas because they can't keep promoting these things that don't generate profit just for the sake of looking good, like we're taking care of a particular demographic. Like, a company is meant to be focused on generating profit, not being a charity for certain people. DEI is not conducive to profitability, right? You can't say, okay, because we're going to hire more women or a particular racial demographic that's going to make more money. That's not the case. That's not how it works. Here we've got an example of someone who is from an ethnic minority background who is criticizing DEI, and it's quite important to consider his perspective.
DEI initiative in corporate America.
Oh, yeah, short version, DEI official, that's what I call him. Walks into my office, starts telling me after all these years of being at the company, I'm going to show you how to get along with everybody you work with. I just looked at him and said, hey, so now you're telling the black man what to do? Boy, white liberal, black.
Wait a minute.
Yeah, use the color again.
Where DEI goes wrong? Is that the
DEI,
point?
well,
Yeah.
where it goes wrong is it exists, but that's another story.
Well, and Carol, like the tech companies, we talked about that this morning. All these tech companies are like, enough. You know, we got to make profits, and DEI isn't working. Great idea on paper, maybe in theory, not good for business.
Oh, that's exactly right. So when I worked at Meta in Menlo Park, California, we were a cost center. So I was led the counterterrorism analysis program, and every day we were so aware that it was the programmers and the software engineers that kept our lights on, that made money for the companies, and we, even as a counterterrorism people, very important job I might add, we didn't make them money. So we were always on the hook, we thought, for being axed. The fact that these DEI programs, it took this long to axe them, too little too late in my opinion.
Yeah, I mean.
So what you do is you have an interesting example of this guy, right? He's from an African-American background, I would assume, and the guy in the middle here. And he's mentioning, you know, what will happen, and the way DEI gets handled in some of these major corporations is they will essentially just hire a woman or someone they deem of a minority background, and they will have them like a DEI officer. They'll assign them to a very senior, accomplished man in a senior role and tell them, oh, you need to speak to people like this. You need to be more conscious of people's race or people's gender and things like that. And they're like these mini dictators that will go around dictating to accomplished people to adhere to this cultural Marxist DEI equality type of diversity agenda, right? And it's typically like a young person mentoring the old person and trying to convince them to follow this left-wing ideology, right? And in many cases, it will be these radicalized white liberals who lived a comfortable life, who don't really understand the experience of people of different racial demographics, and it will dictate to like a black person in this case. And a lot of these things, like I say, it doesn't really work. It just works from a perception standpoint. It's not really focused on increasing profitability. And the truth is, right, when people work hard and you have a meritocratic system and people progress on the basis of their ability, most important people at a company might not be the chosen demographic. So what I mean by that, you might have a super guy who's good at coding and tech work, but he might not be politically correct. He might not be a feminist or a liberal or believe in the woke ideology. So what you're going to do, you're going to pick the tech guy who's going to do the best coding you get in the tech industry, but he's not going to be woke enough? Or do you want someone who's woke, who's going to be not as good as at the job? Or do you want to compromise in between the... So companies really need to take into account like what approach they're taking and how they can alienate good quality workers by demanding that they pursue this liberal ideology of DEI.
It should be about merit, and that is whatever color you are, whatever way you identify, you should get the job based on your performance and your ability, because that's what helps everybody around you. And it rises all boats, right? So if you've got somebody, this was designed to correct a problem, but now you've overcorrected the problem, and now you've got people who are going to be unemployed because they were hired specifically to fix a problem that didn't exist in the first place, especially sitting here in 2023. So now you have to undo all that, and what a mess that's going to be.
Yeah, and Julie,
So this is another good point, right? So if we're going to focus on meritocracy, that's the way you build a system, a functioning society, and people are motivated that if they work hard, it does pay off. If you tell some people, well, if you work hard, it's going to pay off, but it's going to pay off more if you're a woman, more if you're a particular ethnic minority, it's going to pay off less if you're white or you're Asian or you're a man, then you're going to lose motivation of those employees. And that has happened to me at some of the companies I've worked at. When you see some aggressive DEI push that doesn't benefit my demographic, right? Either you have meritocracy or you have favoritism based on race and gender, and DEI is favoritism based on race or gender. And you have a higher quality company if you do focus on meritocracy and competency instead, and everyone benefits. There's more profits and things like that. There's not just this impression of equality. So now, just to again show you an interesting perspective of other people who you might think wouldn't be critical of DEI, you've got someone who's actually from an African-American background who's talking about DEI. So let's see what he got to say about it and who he thinks it benefits.
We hear a lot about these diversity, equity, inclusion councils on our jobs in corporate America. And as Black people, we start to think that these things are for us or that they include us. But the truth couldn't be further. DEI is not intended for Black people. It is for the LGBTQ and immigrants mostly, and women secondary. It is not intended to help or promote or distinguish Black people on the job. It is for the LGBTQ, but they give a Black face to represent it, to make Black people believe in it, but it is not intended for you. It never was.
So this is an important point because I noticed that every company, when you have DEI, you have typically a black person or black woman who's the spearhead of it, right? And but typically, a lot of those programs don't necessarily benefit black men or straight black men. I think it might benefit women in general or women of color to a certain extent, but they give a black face to represent it. I realized that in HR, in recruiting roles, things like that, they typically have quite a senior black woman or a woman who would be doing that, right? And the main beneficiary, as he said there, for DEI is not me, it's not this guy. It's not many of you watching this. The original benefit of DEI and gender equality is what was being pushed before DEI, was white women benefit, the rainbow community benefit, the rainbow flag community, and immigrants who just like new to the country benefit. Not like people who've been here and working hard for decades. Those people like me and you, we're probably on the not on the receiving ends of those benefits. So, and we're going to cover next is how DEI is a politically driven agenda. It's not based on race or helping people or equality. It was based on specific instances around George Floyd. So let's listen to what you have to say.
They'll put a black face on it. They'll use George Floyd's death to promote it, to institute it across all companies nationwide. And then they'll sneak in and they'll reveal the true purpose later, which is to get the LGBTQ representation higher in these corporate environments and to put fast-track women to get into senior level positions. And I'll tell you from my experience in corporate America, that was already happening. I was in corporate for more than a decade, nearly 15 years, and most of my managers were women. White women.
So there we go, right? Because I know from some of the comments I get on my videos that people think I may be hypercritical or hyper-focused on, feminism or women or white women in positions of power in corporate roles, but they are predominant minority. If we're going to think about all the minority groups that aren't white men, because that's how this narrative's been driven from the DEI perspective, which demographic gets more favorable treatment apart from white men, if we're going to assume that white men are the predominant employees or workers or management? The primary demographic that benefits is not black men, Asian men. It's not even the other demographics that are benefiting right now, which would be migrants or people of certain religions or the rainbow community. The primary benefit is white women. They have been the primary beneficiary of DEI from the beginning. George Floyd thing was, as I say, manufactured, as he says, around the Democrat vote, and they sneak in all these other demographics that they want to favor. Now, why do they focus on white women specifically, or some of the rainbow flag community or migrants? It's similar to the political agenda where they will have the right beliefs. And what I mean by the right beliefs is they will align with whatever the government or the establishment wants, whether that's the climate agenda, the feminist agenda, the emasculating, demoralizing men agenda, blaming everything on toxic masculinity, blaming things on men, the family structure, the patriarchy, everything this system wants to destroy. The demographics that support the destruction of these things is who this system will support. This system wants to destroy the nation state, so it'll support migrants. It wants to destroy men and the family structure, so it supports feminists and bias against men and labeling men as misogynist and things like that. It wants to support the complete control of the climate. So they'll pick demographics that are, liberal, left wing, who want to limit your ability to eat meat or drink milk or drive a car, things like that. So that's the focus. There's a reason why they're focusing on specific demographics. DEI is a political agenda. It's not focused on gender equality, racial equality. It's focused on putting these radical people, demographics that the system is quite effective at radicalizing to push far left agendas over you and rule over you, right? So typically they'd have these quotas. So on several occasions, I'd worked on teams where you'd see white women get promoted quite aggressively, quite quickly through the ranks because some senior management, middle-aged white guy wants to give her preferential treatment, probably because he gets some of his targets for diversity is to promote more of people from different backgrounds and genders. And sometimes you see people with the same level of experience as you who are getting paid more. And I want you to find that bias. I don't want to drill the point home too closely. I know some of you sensitive. Leave a comment below if you're sensitive about this topic. I've worked in many different major investment banks. I'll show you some of them here. I have been in many different environments, in corporate environments. And on several occasions, and on two that come to mind right now, I've been next to a team or working as part of a team where you'd have like one white man in a position of power and literally almost all the other team, like 10 white women would be working for him. And then you might have one person of minority background, myself, or maybe two of us, maybe myself being someone from Asian background, of Indian descent, and you'd have one, maybe a black woman, right? So you'd have like black woman, Asian man, and then like 10 white women and one white man and a white woman at the top. So if you really think about all the teams you work in and all the different experiences you have, I can only speak on my experience here. That's kind of like very overt bias in your face, because I can't think of any instances where you have an entire corporate team in a major company and they're all Indian, or they're all black, or they're all Indian men, or they're all black men, or they're all white men. You might see maybe a bit of the men thing, because before maybe you had more racial equality, they were primarily some of the workers in some of these top corporate jobs. But yeah, I really want you to compare this, because what I've seen, I can only speak on that, right? There have been many teams I've seen, at least two, where you have like 10 white women. You're not going to find a team with 10 black men or 10 Asian men. The only time I can think you'd see that might be in the tech teams or the outsourcing teams, so they outsource work to Mumbai or India, where you might see a team full of Indian people. Or you might occasionally see maybe more in certain roles, maybe some technical roles, you might see more Indians, or tech roles, things like that. You'll never see a team like full of 10 black men or 10 Asian men, right? It really is a heavy bias that I do see in terms of white women. And then you have a lot of simp white men who are like liberal managers who will really pander to the feminist demographic and their beliefs and things like that. And then also you'd see people who really have really secure jobs. And I realize that if you're an ethnic minority, if you're a straight man, some cases we see recently some discrimination against straight white men, but I also see a lot of discrimination and the lack of job stability for straight black men and straight Asian men, because you don't typically fit in within the social paradigm at work, because as I say, it's quite biased in terms of liberalism, feminism, things we're not necessarily more comfortable with. And then because you don't fit in socially, your job instability is quite high. That's what I realized. The turnover of straight men of color is probably a lot higher than it is for white women, because they fit in socially. Everything's built around making the social environment comfortable for them in corporate America, in corporate roles. And that's really what does define a lot of career progress. And also sometimes then you have these other agendas where they will focus on having more women of color, right? So they'll have things called quotas. They have a quota for hiring a certain amount of women, certain percentage of women, and then hiring a certain percentage of women of color, and they'll call that a double quota. They have a quota for women and then a quota for women of color, and that's called a double quota, and that means they're meeting their hiring targets under this DEI political agenda. And then that really does kind of impact, like I say, job security for everyone else, because we feel out of place. We feel like if we say something wrong, or our career could be ruined, or the system might be leveraging it against us. So it kind of is a difficult scenario to be dealing with. So we're going to move on to Elon Musk here, right? Now, Elon Musk is talking about DEI, and he's very critical of it. And he's got an interesting phrase that we can use here. He compares DEI, diversity, equity, and inclusion, to MEI. Merit, excellence, and intelligence, right? Now, I want you to leave me a comment below and let me know, do you prefer DEI or MEI, right? What's more preferable to you? Do you prefer that we have a workplace culture that is, if it has to be one or the other, diversity, equity, and inclusion, or meritocracy, excellence, and intelligence? Because I think the latter, because in the latter, at least you can succeed on the basis of your ability. We might say, okay, there should be no discrimination on the basis of race and gender, but then how do you differentiate between, an Asian man and a black man? Are you going to say one is less represented than the other, so they deserve more promotions? Or are you going to say one is actually better at the job than the other? And I know sometimes that's not easy to measure, but it should be focused on your individual ability, the content of your character, as Martin Luther King might say, rather than what background you come from. Now, it mentions a company which says, we hire only the best person for the job. We seek out and demand excellence unapologetically and prefer people who are very smart. And that's what the bias should be in. The bias should be on who's the best for the role, not the best demographic on the basis of how it could be perceived, right? So that's very important to consider. Then it has this part where it says, in many ways, meritocracy is a core part of the American dream. Many believe that anyone, regardless of background or upbringing, can succeed through hard work. The anti-DEI crowd sees diversity inclusion initiatives as threatening these values. And you're not going to have people who are motivated to work if you're going to say, well, we're not going to give you the same prospect of succeeding if you don't agree to, if you don't accept the bias against you because you're a man. We need to be biased against you because you're Asian or you're white or you're black and you're a man. You have to be biased. We have to have biased against you. People are just not going to buy into that system and continue participating in it. Now, many people are waking up to the issues with the DEI being biased. So let's listen to this example here and see what we can learn.
Letting in the Taiwanese daughter of a private equity billionaire is not diversity. And this is another sign of our progress. In America today, you'd rather be born non-white or gay than poor. So I think we need to recognize our victory and our progress, but then figure out a way to come together. Because DEI is causing a lot of problems. Because what has happened with DEI? People of color deserve advantage. They've been treated really poorly, right? Well, also the Japanese. We interned the Japanese in concentration camps. What about them? What about women? Think about all the shit women have taken. Well, what about gay people, for God's sakes? They've been persecuted. And we ended up with a construct, an expensive construct that has huge apparatus and people that can never be fired, you can never question it, or you're called a racist if you ever question DEI efforts, right? Where we're purposely advantaging 76% of the population. The only people we're not advantaging are the 24% of people in America applying to college that are white and male. So when you are...
So there you go, right? So he's mentioning, oh, you want diversity? What are you going to do? You're going to have a college or a university that lets in a Taiwanese woman. So she's a double quota. She's a woman of color. But at the end of the day, right, so she's coming from a billionaire family. She probably live a very comfortable life. She's not dealing with any type of class issue. She's very upper class. So are we saying that's diversity? And that's what you see. I've seen it in the corporate environment, at university, things like that. You'd have maybe very, very wealthy women coming from foreign backgrounds, and they're given a very easy life. But they consider they're oppressed, they're breaking the gender glass ceiling, blah, blah, blah. But they kind of live an easy life and preferential treatment. They might be rich, but because they're a minority, we're meant to believe that they deserve special treatment. I've seen this at sales and trading teams and major banks and things like that. Now, also, like it says, then it creates a whole hierarchy, like who we're going to give preferential treatment for. If you're a woman, you get some preferential treatment, but if you're a woman and you're colored, you're from Taiwanese or a particular race, you get even other preferential statement. It creates a hierarchy of the oppression Olympics, who's more oppressed than the other. Whoever has a bigger victim status gets more preferential treatment. Now, how are we defining the winners in society here? Who comes from the biggest victim background, or who's the most productive and most professional and most effective at doing the job, right? And that's what this system has done. It's been completely demotivating for people like me, who from an Asian background or Asian man, things like that. And I'm sure it's been demotivating for you, some of you out there, where you are putting in the effort and it's like, oh, that gets overlooked because you're not sufficiently a big enough victim based on the narrative. And you can't question it. Otherwise, if you do question it, they're going to consider you, oh, you're judging people. You need to get on board with a radical left-wing ideology and believe certain people are oppressed. And then more important than that, in a sense, it creates a dynamic whereby you're like, oh, cool, well, if I can't succeed on the basis of my ability, do I need to lean into the victim narrative? And we can rewire history any way that could benefit us. Like Winston Churchill, like the UK Prime Minister during World War II, he said some racist things against Asian people. So British Empire was in India and they had exploited a lot of their resources in India. So can I benefit that in terms of my job opportunities today? Can I get reparations? Can I get beneficial hiring and promotion benefits on the basis that I'm Indian and British Empire colonized and had imperialism in India? I can't reap the benefits, but if you're from other backgrounds, you could. If you're a woman and you just whinge about men and toxic masculinity, you get favorable treatment. This is how ridiculous it is. Now, in this clip, what we're going to look through is DEI from the perspective of Elon Musk and some conservatives, right? So it's interesting to hear this perspective, and we're going to go through a few of Elon Musk's tweets as part of this. So let's have a listen to what Charlie Kirk, the leader of Turning Point USA, which is a conservative movement, to comment on this.
It shouldn't have taken this long. They call you a racist. Ignore them when they say that. Get rid of the DEI office. Go back to meritocracy. DEI is at odds with the promise of the American Constitution. It's at odds. You cannot have a meritocracy and have DEI. So choose. Which way, America? Do you want a segregated society? Do you want Christmas parties like in Boston where white people are not allowed? That is DEI. Do you want black-only dormitories? That is DEI. Do you want bonuses based on skin color? That is DEI. Or do you want work ethic and merit to be rewarded? That is what built this country. We have to get back to it. So right now, we have to go on a non-stop deletion campaign and get rid of every single DEI office in America immediately.
Charlie, can I ask you a follow-up on that? Great point. So,
So what can we learn from this, right? Now, DEI, as I say, it disadvantages a lot of different groups of people under the guise of equality. It actually works on segregating people. You know, they have like team events or many events in an office where they'd be like, oh, we need a special women's empowerment group or this particular empowerment group. And you might say there's a time and place to serve them, but there's not like a men's empowerment group. There's not like any focus on helping certain demographics. There might be like a left-wing liberal company team event, but there won't be one for conservatives. It's typical. And then also when it comes to bonuses, I've seen, like I said, there is a heavy bias on gender equality and things like that. So if you have a man and woman, and a man is putting in more effort than the woman or yielding more results than the woman, they have statistics that they want to show that women are getting the same amount of bonus as a man. So they'll increase the woman's bonus to be in line with a man, even if the man was doing more work and having more work output than the woman. Because at the back end with their statistics, they have to make sure everything's equal. Now that's a form of like socialism. It's replacing meritocracy with DEI. And it's so obvious, and the way it's so obvious, I've seen behind the scenes, so I know how these things get rigged. But even if you don't consider that, right? What is obvious when you're in the workplace? You might see a couple people in a functioning company that are not very good at their job, but the fact that more and more of us are noticing incompetent employees, incompetent co-workers, incompetent managers, it does lead to the question, is this person genuinely hired because of their ability, or are they a DEI hire? Are they meeting some type of hiring quota? And you feel that more and more in the office these days, like a complete level of incompetence where you have to question why they've been hired. And then you do reach a conclusion where they're hired because they're a woman and they have a woman hiring quota, or a particular ethnic group that they have a hiring quota for. So it's worthwhile considering.
Basically the parallel to DEI.
And again, don't take my word for it. Look at Elon Musk. DEI must die. The point was to end discrimination, not replace it with a different discrimination. That's the world's wealthiest man. He's saying it because it's true. It's not like he has to go make more money or he's going to win favor or friends. And look, they took advantage of the best intentions of the American people. To your point, inclusion. Who wants to be non-inclusive, right? Or diversity. Now, they never actually mean diversity because they want everyone to look different but think the same. They don't mean They don't believe in intellectual diversity or viewpoint diversity or religious diversity. They want just skin color diversity.
Bingo.
And they want ideological totalitarianism. That's the most important thing. So look, and DEI is now lasting much longer than COVID. And the top priority of this conference and our podcast and all of us together is to unite our forces. If you're a libertarian, conservative, Democrat, I don't care. We must unite and kick the DEI virus out of America as quickly as possible.
So it took a South African made American, Elon Musk, to understand how it works there to basically call this out.
Tom.
So here we've got some important points, right? So Elon Musk is talking about how diversity isn't a good thing too. So he's a successful self-made person from South Africa, been very successful. I'm sure everyone knows Elon Musk from Twitter, I think he worked in PayPal and launching that, and also Tesla cars, electric cars, of course. So he's kind of been successful in these things, and he hasn't been depending on being a minority in any way, shape or form. And what you have to understand, and this is the key point I was making earlier, they don't mind, they're pushing for diversity when it comes to gender and race, but they don't want ideological diversity. They don't want you to be there if you, for example, at some banks I've worked out without naming them, if you support Trump, if you have conservative views, if you have right-wing views, if you believe certain things that they deem conspiracy theories, right? So if you, even now, they're pushing the whole ESG thing. So if you don't agree with plant-based diets in a finance firm, they consider you to be like a climate change denier. If you don't believe that women are oppressed by men, then somehow you're a misogynist, right? If you don't subscribe to your victim status as a ethnic minority, then they can't leverage that to push their narrative, so they don't like it. And I don't like to be labeled as a victim, as a person of color or things like that. We can look through these historical instances that have occurred. I don't like to think about things like that, right? And dwell on that. Now, this ideological totalitarianism, as he mentioned it, or this kind of stranglehold on what you're allowed to think is quite obvious to all of us right now. It's like, so the level of bias is too overt for us to pretend like it doesn't exist, right? Now that's what I mean. Like, and when you try to defend yourself, like this white man or an Asian man, people will label you, you're discriminating on other people on the basis of race or the basis of their gender. You're not even allowed to speak up about it. And it's gone so far, it's become so obvious that it's become such a major talking point for people. And even a conservative meeting like this, you've got people clapping because they all have to deal with it at work, like me or you. Now, I hope you found that helpful and you understand why, as I started this session with, this video with, the reality of DEI is that it's not profitable. It discriminates against men, blacks and Asian men in particular, and to a certain extent white men too. And it's not really benefiting anyone apart from people who are like liberal, left-wing, feminist, woke, and they push the woke agenda. The woke ruined Hollywood movies, ruined video games, ruined the work environment, even ruined the gym environment when everything's become about, having a rainbow flag here and there, having music glorifying women. It's like, can we just go 5 minutes without pushing the woke agenda, which has just ruined everything in culture and society to the point where people don't want to go out. People want to work from home. A large reason why people want to work from home is that they don't want to be around cancel culture or hashtag me too in the office and things like that. They'd prefer to be by themselves. So, there's nothing that hasn't been ruined in the West by this woke ideology. And now it's good to see it's backfiring. DEI is getting cancelled because it tried to cancel so many other people. Thanks for listening. If you want honest career advice, not politically correct nonsense career advice you'd hear from a lot of people who will give you cookie cutter, chump change advice. You want to boost your income. You want to have an honest career coach to guide you through this tricky employment environment. Reach out to me for career advice. The link's in the description. There are 2 recommended videos on the screen right now. Let me know how you feel about DEI in the description, in the comment section. We can be very honest with each other, and I'll see you next time.